Well, I hope you enjoyed today's Your MMA of the Day video playlist. I think we had an interesting lineup. The stuff about going to India is very intriguing, a high stakes gamble. And the thing that concerns me the most about that is the UFC is investing a lot of their most talented people's time and energy into these expansions of Ultimate Fighter into Brazil, which was a big success, Australia, which launches soon, and remains to see how that does, and now India, which is a very risky move into a completely virgin market, potentially a huge market, and potentially long-term health of the sport. If the Zuffa can lead the way into helping mixed martial arts take root in India, which has a great tradition of combat sports, especially wrestling. That could be enormous for the for the future of the sport. However, I think they're taking their eyes off the ball with the Ultimate Fighter at home. The Ultimate Fighter Fridays debuted tonight. This is the FX's second bite at the apple. This is a format change from the original Ultimate Fighter Live format they debuted with, which everybody agreed was a stinker. Nobody wants to see fights between guys they don't know. They don't care if they're live or not. The shows basically functioned as countdown episodes for then bad fights between guys you didn't know about or care about and that you won't hear from again because they're not going to make the cut in the UFC. This season, they're going back to the tried and true pre-taped format, so they'll be able to build drama because they'll know the ending in advance and they'll be able to edit the stories to fit that to get into that narrative and build the story. It's a proven formula that worked on Spike for several seasons, but was hitting the wall of diminishing returns pretty hard towards the end, and I think this season's going to be no different. There's been very little hype. They canceled the lead-in event in Indianapolis. It was originally scheduled for earlier this week, and I think that was a good call because they've been running too many events. But it means that they didn't have the usual lead-in for the Ultimate Fighter, so they couldn't remind fans that it was coming up. So we've got Roy Nelson and Shane Carwin coaching a team of two teams of unknowns. I believe they're doing light heavyweights and maybe another division. I don't know. The thing is, I don't really care because I expect very few of these guys to be competitive in the UFC. It's been years and years, probably since season 6, maybe season 5, the lightweights, was that whichever one that was. The lightweight season was probably the last time you had a major influx of new talent. That season saw Gray Maynard, Joe Lozon, Nate Diaz, Manny Gamburi, and a whole bunch of guys that have become UFC staples over the ensuing years and done great. The first seasons were very much like that. You had future champions like Rashad Evans and Forrest Griffin, top contenders like Michael Bisping, Josh Koscheck, Chris Lieben, Kenny Florian come out of that mix, Diego Sanchez. But since then, it's really tapered off, and to the point where in the last few seasons, I think Ryan Bader, season 7 or 8, was the last Ultimate Fighter winner to become a contender. He's topped out at just below title contender level. And since then, you've had guys like Efrain Escudero that are barely on the margins of the promotion. You're just not bringing in top talent. And I think what you're seeing is the UFC has just been so locked into this concept that they're going to bring in unknown fighters who've never fought in the UFC before, and this reality show is going to be the ticket to the UFC, and somehow that's going to produce stars, and that is just not happening. The UFC has got to switch their model and start including guys who've proven they can hang in the UFC and shown promise that they could be actual contenders. They need to get them on that reality show. They need to get those guys the exposure. I know that's going to require rethinking the whole formula of the show, the entire format, everything, the way the contracts work, everything. Fine, it's time to scrap it, roll up your sleeves, start with a new blueprint. We've got to get fighters like Evan Dunham and the future John Joneses of the world built up on FX so that people will know who they are and care about their fights. You've got too many fighters like Johnny Hendricks that are heading into title contention, Chris Weidman. These are guys that are great fighters that need the exposure, and yet nobody knows who they are. We got the Jakes, Jake Ellenberger, Jake Shields. We got these guys that just are not known to fans, and they need the exposure so that they can show what they can do, and the UFC can get fans to invest. Because even with fairly poor ratings, over 500,000 people watched The Ultimate Fighter live every episode last season, between 500,000 and a million at its peak. That's a lot of exposure. They're not going to get that kind of exposure on Fuel, where the events and the fights and the programs get a ceiling of maybe 200,000. I think 300,000 something is the all-time record for a Fuel broadcast. They've got a limited window on FX. It's not like Spike, which was basically the UFC channel. FX is very stingy with their programming slots because even though it only gets in as many households as Spike, its ratings are better, their schedule is stronger, and the UFC needs to take maximum advantage of their rare opportunities to get on FX, and they need to build the next generation of stars. That's my rant for the day. Enjoy your weekend. There's a little bit of boxing action, not too much MMA. We'll be back next week with more MMA of the day, more rants as we lead into UFC 152 on September 22nd. Enjoy your weekend.